everyone, to Astrology Today with Jeff Harmon. I'm Ella, Jeff's assistant. Welcome. We hope you all are doing
welcome.
very, very well. So, gosh, I'm going to jump in with a question this evening, Jeff.
Okay.
You know, the world seems so divided. It just seems so divided. I mean, you can feel it. There's so much tension, and it's quite upsetting. And I would love to pose this question to the chart, to the astrology. What's going to happen with all this? Like, I hope we're going to start to come together instead of dividing more. We've got the elections coming up. It's a scary time. You know, you look at the world in general, you turn on the news, and it's unbelievable what we're hearing everywhere. So what does the astrology, how does the astrology look at this?
Well, I think how I'd answer that is, this is what I was afraid of many years ago when I was mentioning to everyone, you know, that 2020 would be a breaker point, a major breaker point in civilization. And the reason why is not for a long time, like 240 years, have we had a confluence of a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is exceedingly powerful, and a 240-year mutation Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, all happening within the same year. That all happened in 2020. We had COVID, and then we had this political mayhem and the election stuff and all the stuff that went on and all the allegations and everything. So we've seen here again, I think we said it best in our previous podcast, you know, the world, you know, in epic times. And that is, we are witnessing fascism. Clearly, it's a time of fascism. And I would say, you know, I mean, doesn't it feel like that to you? I mean,
well, it sure
obvious.
does.
It sure does. Yeah.
Sure does.
So,
well,
So
I mean,
here's
that we won't go deeper into that. That's the hope.
Well, you know, I hate to say it, but I think we're going to. And I would love to be wrong on that response and analysis, but let me show you why. This is an interesting thing, and this kind of relates to Elon Musk. You know, Elon Musk just took over, you know, Twitter. Everyone knows that, right? And he avoided a lawsuit by making the purchase. And I think, you know, one of the things that's really germane here is talking about freedom of speech, the media, propaganda, and the thing that reared its head in the last decade, particularly in the last probably 7 years, is the social media, the Twitter, the Facebook, the, you know, all ability and Instagram, everything. Never before in modern history could we even conceive of something like this. But here's something very interesting. You know, social media is a double-edged sword for those who are trying to control the world. And it's also an interesting double-edged sword for the people, because it's very hard to censor people and not have them know they're being censored. I mean, everyone knows they're being censored, right? Well, what Musk just did, I think, is one of the most profound wedges in between the government's infiltration into social media that's ever happened. And, you know, it's interesting. I want to share a chart here. Elon Musk's chart. Now, no one's really certain exactly what time this guy is born. And I can tell you, I don't know his exact time. I got this off of the social Lois Rodden. And one of the things we'll see here is, this is Elon Musk's chart right here that we see on the screen. This is his Vedic astrology. And one of the things I like about Nadi Vedic astrology is it's much more forgiving, because we don't need a precise birth time. As long as you have the location and you're pretty close. I had off of Lois Rodden's database that he was at 6:30. Now, I've heard other times. So here's the most important thing, though, is Elon Musk has gone through a pretty abrasive time. I will step out here and say this January, Elon Musk's going to have Saturn activate his air trine. And even better, the next couple of years, particularly as the 2024 comes in and we start going into the second half of this Biden presidency, you're going to see the name Elon Musk, I think, showing up a lot more than we think. And here's why. I'll actually animate this for you. There's going to be Jupiter is always a life breath force of the soul. And if we go forward here, you'll notice, let me just go forward in yearly increments. You'll see next year, Elon Musk has Jupiter activating his his fire trine, which that aspects the moon, which is change and also public recognition. More importantly, as we get into the following year, 2024, it transits his Venus and his Earth trine, which is on his Mars. So he's likely to be a very powerful, controversial figure. Where he really gets strong is in 2025. So in 2025, he is actually going to have Jupiter begin to transit his sun and also his Mercury. Those are destiny makers. Wow. So this is very, very powerful. So I think the name Elon Musk is going to stay in the media and probably get a lot stronger. And, his position in Twitter is really interesting. I've heard just a couple of reports in the last few days since he's taken over. People were complaining they were taken down, and they would be tweeting directly to Elon Musk, and he would say, let me look into it. And within an hour, they were back up. Mm-hmm. So we've seen the end of, the censorship, at least on Twitter. Now, YouTube. Huge. YouTube is a different story, but and some of the other platforms. But it's very fascinating that Elon Musk did what he did. And again, I would state that in the next couple of years, this guy has it's going to be a very dynamic time for him. And I don't think his name's going to be removed from the news, and you wouldn't expect so with Twitter. He's going to become a real central player based on the cycles I see in his chart. Very powerful, especially by 2024. So that was one issue on that. And I think that relates to the question. And back, full circle to your opening question, which I happen to like a lot. I would say that clearly, the times right now, the propaganda that we're seeing increase also ties together with something very interesting, the Associated Press. Now, everyone knows what the Associated Press is. It actually began back on, I think it was May 22nd of 1846. Okay, now isn't that an interesting time? Right before the Civil War. Okay, so in the late or mid 1600s, I'm sorry, it's not mid 1800s, forgive me. So that's when the Associated Press started. And it actually started as a collective of media groups in New York, to my understanding. I'm not a historian, but that's what I've read on Wikipedia. And they did it to keep the press fair and balanced, and also provide an unbiased source where everyone could pick from. Well, there's the operative thing is we find that the media now is certainly picking and choosing and slanting what they want to pick and what they want to focus on. And this brings me to an interesting astrological parallel. In the 1850s through the 1860s, we know what happened in 1860 in the Civil War, right? Well, there is an article I read on Political about that nothing is new. The political mayhem that we're seeing right now in 2020, 180 years later, a little over 180 years, is exactly what was going on right before the Civil War. Now, there's always been political mayhem throughout history, but this one is eerily shown by the astrology. And it's quite interesting because what do we have going on there? We literally I was reading stories, anybody can go read it in Political, where literally we had senators punching each other out on the Senate floor. We had one senator, I guess he beat a guy half to death with a cane. This is in the 1850s, right before the Civil War. And it was over, of course, slavery, right? It was like, if you weren't pro-slavery, we were going to beat your brains out. And interesting, that was the Democratic Party. So, but, don't tell anyone. So, horrible. And it was like they were shooting people. There were all kinds of riots in the street. Yeah. I mean, it got really, really nasty. Well, here's what's interesting is the United States had a Neptune square Mars. And I've mentioned this many times on my other podcast. And what's important about that, Neptune square Mars is clearly what? Deception, right? Total deception. And it is clearly, again, not to be crass, but it's urinating down your back and telling you it's raining, right?
Yeah.
So it is clearly not a very forthright energy. Well, guess what, folks? We got the same thing going on again, except this one's different. I've been analyzing the astrology on this. And why is it different? Because we have the element of fascism. And obviously in the 1816, in the 1800s, in the 1860s and 50s, you had newspapers and you had people walking around and talking. Today, you've got social media. You've got the power of just electronic media, cell phones, texts, again, Twitter, Facebook, and all these different platforms out there, Instagram, and on and on and on. So it's a different world today. So the forces shown by the astrology show that not only is this a time of civil unrest, but also a great time of manipulation. And because the United States is now 246 years old, we're seeing that the Neptune square Mars is actually hitting us twice. Once is in the tropical zodiac, and the other one is in the sidereal. So we went through the tropical one in 2020.
Right.
Now we're getting the sidereal hit, which is coming all this year. It wraps up later this year. I'll actually show you that. I've shown this on other podcasts, but I like to demonstrate the astrology because it really does show, what I'm speaking about is not just theory, it's actually math. And you can see this is the United States Sibley chart. And if I put this up, I'm going to go precession correction, which precession correction is always about making it sidereal, right? So for some reason, we're not getting this to work. There it goes. Okay. So you can actually see here the Neptune square Mars is actually right here. This is sidereal. It started really strong this May, came back again this August, and notice the final aspect here is actually going to be next March of 2023. And for anybody watching this is right where these little squares are. I'm actually putting my cursor across right over it. Again, this happened in 1860s, in the late 1850s. And of course, we know the Civil War broke out in 1861 and the tensions were mounting. I read history and I'm just stunned at how violent things. I mean, people were running around and shooting each other. There were gangs and fires and just.
Yeah, that's why we always say nothing's changed. This is nothing new, really.
Well, it is different in this sense. I think now we're not just fighting over freedom for one class of people. We're fighting for freedom for everyone. This is a global effort of tyranny. And the United States, I've been saying this before, the United States is the last spoke in the wheel before it collapses. If the Constitution of the United States, which I think, and the Bill of Rights is probably one of the greatest documents ever drafted, ever, clearly. I mean, where else can you be of any race, any creed, any religion, and have freedom of speech and be able to live freely? Yeah. And if this, they're doing their best at the top of the pyramid to cave this in. I love to quote Lenin. Lenin had, I actually went to the Reagan Library and I was stunned and taken aback on the writing on the wall. I'm going to actually put this on the screen. Lenin actually said that literally he didn't care if 3/4 of the people were murdered or killed as long as the remaining 1/4 be communist. I mean, that's some pretty interesting and stark realizations. And, only people in power at the top of the pyramid would be drunk with that kind of power and want to suppress the rights of any individual, of any race, of any creed, of any color. So this is really where we're at. And I think the United States is such a crucial, you could say, element of the global pushback of this tide of tyranny, and also you could say really communism and fascism. This is truly what it is. And that's what the astrology is showing. And it's interesting because I'm noticing the next real punch here coming up for the Saturn square Pluto is going to be 2028. So this will never end. I mean, and then we're going to, in 2035, which a lot of people have heard, there's agendas, you know, to get their plan in place, these new one world orders, if you will. And the astrology shows that the Saturn Pluto opposition, which brought us 9/11, now, about 35, 40 years later, because this will happen in 2035, you see what I'm saying? So these cycles keep ebbing and flowing. But here's what I like. The beginning of your question is, you know, what's showing this? There's always divine forces counterbalancing it. And I think just by the virtue of the fact that things like what Elon Musk did and also social media, other platforms like Rumble and other that are coming out. I hear True Social is pretty good, and many, many other ones are coming out. I don't know all the platforms, but I know it's giving people a voice for those who want to hear, that is decentralizing the powers that the media had. And I think proof of that is look at the numbers on some of the major networks. They're just atrocious.
Yeah.
They're really caving in.
Really
so
funny.
yeah, the answer to your question is, does the astrology show it? You bet it does. But I think this one is much stronger than the one we had before the Civil War. The Civil War broke out in April of 1861. And interestingly enough, that was right when the Neptune square Mars finished its aspects. And it's doing it again by this spring.
Right. Well, I guess part of my question was also, does the astrology show us coming together? Right? That was part of my question.
It does. I think, I don't know that, you know, the propaganda has run so deep. And I think there's so much division. You know, I would say this, that the division is deep. I don't know that it'll ever fully go away right away. I mean, you got to remember, they have been infiltrating our schools. And I believe you know, a lot of this stuff going on with the district attorneys. This is a new one world order effort that's not just happening to the United States, it's happening globally. And that's why the Saturn Pluto conjunction of 2020 and that very powerful 240-year Jupiter-Saturn conjunction literally is ushering in a new era. So no eras are exactly the same, but the cycles have similar, you know, effects. And this one obviously is much more complex. The world is much more complex. That's common sense. And I would say that it shows the United States, and again, I've been saying this, has a kind of a really wonderful Jupiter aspect that's coming back towards it starting this January. So it is entirely possible that we're going to see some very good things start to come in. And once that happens, I think it's going to be a big deal.
Well, that's a really good sign about the Jupiter, especially coming in January, because we have these midterm elections, right, that are about to hit us. So maybe things won't be that bad. Jupiter, I love Jupiter. Jupiter brings such beautiful energy. And almost sometimes I think of it as a savior, the savior planet in a sense.
It is. It clearly is a savior planet. I mean, look at Jupiter's glyph. It's the crescent of the moon over the cross. Clearly divine glory. In fact, in the Aramaic and Hebrew, Hesed means God's glory. It means divinity. You know, there's several meanings to that, but that's what it means. And it's the blessings. It's not only the largest planet in the solar system, but even in the Nadi astrology, it's referred to as Jiva. Jiva is the breath of the soul, the breath of the spirit, if you will. So that kicks in here right in January. And, I think
Really
the
good.
world's
That's really good.
always evolving here, and divinity always wins, no matter how much trouble these guys cause.
Mm-hmm.
It always wins in the end.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think earlier we were talking about, we wanted to just touch on Trump, Biden, and Harris for a minute.
Yeah, we did. And I'm glad you reminded me of that. One of the things, Donald Trump is actually in quite a bit of danger. And I would say he's got to really watch himself between now and January, actually now and next summer, believe it or not, because Donald Trump it's not being shown here, but he has a progression of, it's called a primary direction. It's Mars squaring Pluto. So if they don't arrest him, they're certainly going to try and take him out any way they can. Plus, he's got a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in his birth chart. So not an easy time for Donald Trump at all. And I would say he's definitely got to watch it. Things tend to go a little rougher for him in the spring. Hopefully that... we'll see how it works out, but that's the way it is. Not much you're going to be able to do about that. The other thing is, you were mentioning Biden, and I would say Biden really is hitting rough waters. Biden, I won't put this on the screen, but because I don't have his chart up, and but I will tell you this: that Biden is going to. Biden, I don't think he's going to complete his third year. And I'll tell you why. One of the things our founding forefathers did is they always picked inauguration days very close to noon. Why would they do that? Well, it puts the sun at noon astrologically. And it's interesting. I've looked at a lot of inaugurations throughout many presidents, and their term seems to go, or in other words, their tenure in office tends to go very much in accordance with the aspects that were in the chart. Like Obama was signed in on a void of course moon, and he was actually signed in again. A lot of people don't know that. And, I looked at Trump. He had really good aspects on the sun, but he had a lot of dissensional stuff on the moon. So, and he had a lot of trouble, but yet he accomplished a lot. So, and I found this throughout, history all the way back. It's really lined up. Well, Biden and Harris's inauguration chart, I'll put that on the screen, is actually really not looking too good. And the reason why, you can see the sun was applying to a conjunction of Saturn. And ultimately, it's all the hard lunar aspects, especially ending up into a conjunction to Mars. So it's really, really tough. And, by primary direction, each degree equals a year. I don't see him completing his third year. I'm actually surprised he went as far as he did. I thought he was going to have big trouble in his first year. He actually did. I mean, that's where he was fumbling and stumbling a lot. Right. And of course, they're literally, I think injecting with Geritol or whatever they're doing should
keeping him going somehow.
Keeping him going. Jill's get kicking the rear end.
So it doesn't look good. The astrology isn't speaking positively to either Biden or Trump at all.
Yeah, well, Biden's really looking rough, especially his presidency, because his presidency has the inauguration chart with really tough aspects between the moon and Mars, trouble, and moreover, between the sun and Saturn. And sun and Saturn's a deal killer. In fact, you can see Pluto and the sun and Saturn are besieging the sun. Actually, Pluto and Saturn are besieging the sun. Plain English, not going to likely go past the third year. He's either going to be taken out, or he's going to have some legal troubles, or something's going to terminate that presidency.
Mm-hmm. Could be health issues, could be something.
Yeah, it looks more like maybe issues of the presidency. That's what it looks like. In other words, his presidency is not going to go too good. I know Richard Nixon had, I don't have it in front of me, but Richard Nixon had a really rough inauguration chart too, and that didn't turn out too well for him. No. So, Before I forget, I want to throw one more chart in here. You can see this is Liz Truss, her inauguration by the Queen just before the Queen of England died. And what's really telling about this inauguration chart is you can see the sun up here at the midheaven. And of course, that arrow is where the sun is at noon, right? Very close to noon. So the Lord of the 10th, meaning the planet ruling the sign on the cusp of the midheaven, was Mercury. Why? Because that's Virgo, and Virgo rules Mercury. Well, Mercury was just about ready to go retrograde. And I've seen this many times in wedding elections and so on and so forth, where people got married or someone got, involved in some big project and they back out of it shortly thereafter when the ruler goes retrograde. Moreover, look at the moon is going to a conjunction of Pluto, just short of 6 degrees, about 5 degrees, 55 minutes. And if you play that out in an electional chart, that can equal just about 6 weeks or 6 weeks plus. And that's just about when everything fell apart and she decided to resign. So here's another really good example of inauguration charts. I think I would wrap this up with, your question. Really, the world is in divided times right now. It really is. And the astrology mirrors that to the T. And I'm really concerned that once these midterm elections are done, that we're going to see a global effort to keep choking off the energy sectors. And if that isn't turned around, people are going to starve to death. You shut down diesel fuel. You have a train strike in this country, or the trucks stop rolling. I've talked to so many people and heard it on the news too, that these truckers are saying if fuel keeps going up, even if it doesn't run out, we're not going to be able to afford to run. And so many goods are transported across this country by independent carriers, not the big guys. There's a lot of big carriers, but a lot of stuff gets here independently.
Yeah, I know.
And those independent truckers can't run.
I know.
Those kind of expenses. They're starving us out. Again, going back to Stalin, Lenin, Mao, and Hitler, these are just a few of the names in the more modern era of mechanized war. I think it was Hitler killed 11 million people. It's guesstimated that Stalin killed somewhere between 25 and 35 million. Those are guesstimates. And I think Mao is guesstimated, some say 50 million, some say 75. Gosh. Others I've heard say it could be up to 100 million people. So, this is where communism goes. And I think, I would close this by saying, people really got to take this serious. Yes, they're going to manipulate the votes, but it's really important for us to get out there and vote, even though I know they're stuffing ballot boxes and they're going to be twiddling bits here, trying to get the machines to work their way. But we still got to be vigilant here.
Do it. Yeah. Definitely.
Yep. And I've been hearing, like the LA Police Department has actually, the sheriff is really ticked off and he's lined up the deputies and they're really trying to detect voter fraud and, ballot box stuffing and all that. So, and I've heard some good rulings lately about, where they've caught a lot of stuff going on. So we'll see what happens, because we don't want to lose this country, man. It is the greatest country in the world.
Yeah. Well,
all right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for watching.
For joining us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. See you soon.
Thank you.